Now we're going to see how to do a profile toolpath. Let's pop back over to our PDF of our part and see what it is that we're talking about. Remember that our stock that we started with is 3.6 inches long, 1.5 inches wide, and ½ of an inch thick. We already faced 0.05 inches off the top of that in our previous video. In this video, what we're going to be learning how to do is how to make the profile of the part. In other words, the outside shape of it. So that profile will be removing a little bit of material just off of the outside because we only have a piece of raw material that's only slightly bigger than the part that we're actually, the outline of the part that we're actually making. So the part that we're actually making is 3.5 inches long and 1.4 inches wide. And it has corners that have a 0.1 inch radius. Let's see how that works out in PathPilot. I'm already logged into PathPilot. If you needed to log into PathPilot, then remember that the first thing you do is go to Reset, then reference the Z, the Y, and the X axes. Then, only because we're using PathPilot Hub in this instance, do you need to change over to G91, and I'll include some text here in what you would enter into our MDI. That changes you over to a relative move, and you will then move to the center of our build area, which we refer to as the fish tank. Then you need to change back to a G90. In other words, you need to change back to an absolute measurement system. And that's after you zero in the X, Y, and Z axes. I've included directions to do that so far in 2 previous videos, so I'm not going into great detail here. You should be familiar with it at this point. So now we need to do that profile. So we're going to go back to conversational. And in the conversational mode, we're going to be selecting now profile. It already has tool number 4 in here, 10,000 RPMs, a feed rate of 60 inches per minute, a Z feed rate, in this case of 13.5, and a Z clearance height of 0.5 inches. All that is perfect for what we're doing. We don't really have to change much. However, if you do look at what we have here on the screen, we've got a lot of extra boxes here. So we need to be very careful in what it is that we're actually telling the machine to do and what information we're providing it. If you look at the image that's in the middle of the screen, you can see that there is a rectangle given here on the outside, and then there is a darker purple rectangle that has some rounded corners. And if we look at the side view, we can see that that is a boss, or a part that sticks up over the rest of the material. So this is showing us how we would make a profile that cuts this out from the larger square cornered rectangle on the outside. Well, that larger square cornered rectangle, that is our material. And so that is different than the actual profile that we're going to be creating. So when we look at this value here that says X start, we're saying, where do we want the machine to start removing material? And so that is going to be the back left corner of our 3.6 inch long rough piece of stock. And so remember that our coordinate system is based on the very center of this material. So that back left corner is actually negative 1.8. And the reason we have negative is because it's to the left of that origin. It's in the negative X direction. The reason it's 1.8 is because that is the half of the 3.6 inch long material. I'm going to press enter here, and it takes me over to X end. And X end would therefore be 1.8 in the positive direction. And if I hit enter here, what we'll see is then it is going to ask for the X profile start. You know what? I don't want to go there just yet. Let's finish off this actual rough stock and where we want things to start. Let's look at the Y. Remember that our rough material is 1.5 inches wide, so this is going to be 0.75, and it will then end at negative 0.75. So what I've done here is I have now entered the X start and X end, and the Y start and the Y end. All of that pertains to our rough stock that we're starting with. Let's now look at the profile. In other words, the profile that we're actually trying to get it down to. And so that part will be 3.5 inches long. So this needs to be negative, again, because it's to the left side of the center, 1.75. Okay, what about the X end? Well, again, 1.75, just in the positive direction. What about the Y profile start? That would be this one right here. That Y profile start, because we want our finished profile to be 1.4 inches wide, this would be 0.7. And our Y profile end would be negative 0.7. So everything that I've entered in here so far is for the X start and X end, the Y start and Y end. That's all pertaining to rough stock. The X profile start, the X profile end, that's pertaining to the final part. The Y profile start, the Y profile end, that's pertaining to the final part. Now let's look at some of these other things. What do I want the radius of my corners to be for my profile? If I put in 0, those would be square cut corners, but on our print we can see that that was a 0.1 inch. Step over. How much do I want to step over each time? Well, I'm going to stick with the same step over that we have in our tool data table, and that tool data table says 0.0275, and we probably could be more aggressive and take a wider step over, but we just don't need to. It's not a race. We're not in a big rush right here. Okay. The last information that we need to put in here is regarding the depth of cut and the Z distances. So let's first look at where we want to start our Z values. Well, remember, in the previous operation, we faced the material by removing 0.05 inches. So our Z start here is actually going to be negative. Remember, it's below what our 0 height was, 0.05 inches. Okay. Now, how far down do we want that to go? Like, where do we want the absolute bottom of our part to be? Well, that would be, if we're making a part be 1/4 of an inch thick, we have to take that 0.25 and we have to add that to where we started, because we're trying to figure out where we end. And so that means it would be negative 0.3, but I want to go just a touch deeper to make sure that I'm removing all of the material that I would need to, plus just a touch more to be sure. So I'm going to make that 0.31. So I'm actually cutting a whole 1/100th of an inch too deep. So then the last thing here is the depth of cut. So the depth of cut is how deep do you want it to cut each pass. And that is from the top of where you're starting to the bottom of where you're going to. For us, that's a difference of 0.26 inches. Now, if I wanted to, I could go in multiple steps. Maybe I want to make it 0.13, and so that way it would go down in 2 steps. But I just don't need to do that. So my depth of cut would be 0.26. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to post that to a file. Oh, before I do that, let's go up here and let's change this. And whenever I have a profile, I like to be a little more descriptive. So I'm calling it perimeter. And now when I click post file, I want to make sure that I am saving it in the right place. Remember, if you want to keep your data, and you do, you want to click on virtual path pilot files. Any other place that you store them, you're going to lose them. They're going to be wiped clean when you log out. Go into bearing plate, double click that, And I actually already have one saved as perimeter, but I'm just going to overwrite that. So I can click Save. And do I want to overwrite that? Yep. So I click Overwrite, and now it shows me what my profile looks like. And honestly, I'm not getting too much description from that. So I'm going to right mouse click, and I'm going to go ISO View. And just to zoom out and show you what we're looking at, this is where our part is in our fishbowl. And I can zoom in, and you can see that that we are having one toolpath that goes around the outside. It actually is doing a full retract and taking another pass at these corners because there's a little bit more material that's removed from those corners than what's removed from the edges here. So it makes a separate nibble on the corners. Looks like it does each one of those twice. But that's looking really good right there. What you need to do now as a student is you need to click on Print Screen, and then you're going to take your file and you're going to be pasting it into your Google Doc. So let's go over to Google Doc right now. And I'm going to type in perimeter and Control V. So there's my image of my perimeter that I have, my profile that I had it cut around the perimeter of the part. The next video is going to be about doing pockets. I'm going to show you how to do 2 of the pockets. Then you're going to be in charge of creating the next 2 pockets. And then we just have 2 videos after that are relatively short. Thanks. Have a good day. Now we're on the main page, and I'm going to press Cycle Start.